Welcome to Stitchery Stories, where textile artists share their life in fabric and thread, inspiration, techniques, disasters and delights. And I'm Susan Weeks, enthusiastic embroiderer and textile art dabbler who also loves podcasting. So take a break and enjoy our light-hearted chat, and please share with your friends so they can enjoy it too. Hello and welcome to our lovely guest today, Anne Kelly. Hi Anne.
Hi.
I have here a quote: "Found textiles are at the heart of Anne's work, driven not by a sense of ecological warriorship or thrift, but by a more emotional and creative drive to save, incorporate and honour these fragile survivors of times past, whether vintage or more recent." And that's from Dina Beverley. So Anne is a mixed media and textile artist, author and tutor living and working in the UK. Her richly layered and embroidered works are reminiscent of tapestries and have been applied to a variety of surfaces. She exhibits locally and internationally, often combining exhibitions with teaching. Her first co-written book, Connected Cloth, explores her project work up until 2013. Textile Nature was published in 2016 about the many links between textiles and nature and has been reprinted. Her third book, Textile Folk Art, is due out in 2018. Anne writes for magazines and blogs about her work and inspirations, and she is a member of the Crafts Council Directory. So there we are, Anne. That's you in a nutshell.
Yes.
And so before we get started with your stitchery story today, would you like to share with us what you are working on and what has got you excited?
Well, I've been really privileged this year to do a lot of travelling for work, teaching in Australia, New Zealand, exhibiting in France, and I'm off to India shortly for a coloricious tour of West Bengal.
Exciting.
Very exciting. It made me think about travelling, and it made me think about how travelling isn't always positive for everybody, and how I'd like to incorporate the idea of movement, travel, and how people use the images of their local environment. I've been studying a lot about folk art for the new book, and that's come through. So the idea of doing a project with something to do with travel was sort of forming in my mind. And then I'm going to be exhibiting at Olympia in March at the Knitting and Stitching Show again.
Right.
So I thought I could I like doing collaborative pieces, and I thought I would start a call out really for travel tags, a project called Moving Memories. So really things to do with moving and travel. And I'm happy to say I launched it on Saturday and I've already had 2 tags through the post. So people seem to be really excited about it, which is wonderful.
Brilliant.
And it's something I'll be sharing when I do lots of teaching around the UK.
Yes.
I'm off to St. Ives at the end of this week and I'll be sharing it there as well.
Right. And so, yes, you have had, therefore, a very exciting year. There's a lot of travelling. And have you been teaching in all of those travels?
Not all of them. Most of them have been teaching for teaching. The one in France was a festival of textiles, and it was really super. It was in a very small part of the Liberate in Provence, and I was given a whole church to exhibit in, which was great.
Wow.
And they had hundreds of visitors from all over Europe and even people from further afield. So it was a great event, really lovely event.
That sounds absolutely fantastic, and quite a logistic exercise, I should imagine, taking all your stuff to go and fill a church.
Yes, I went on the train because you can take more bags.
Yes.
It was a real adventure. It was great.
Fantastic. And the tour of India, that's like a holiday then?
It's a sort of craft specialist holiday, I would say. And I'm what they call the host, so I'm a link person there for the ladies who are coming with us.
Right.
So I'm not actually teaching on that, but I'm just encouraging people, and they're really for support.
Right.
Great.
Well, that's really nice, and having that support and inspiration, really, I suppose you can shed a different light on some of the things that you're looking at as well, no doubt.
Yes, and I think I'll be learning as well, because the people that we're visiting are specialists. for example, in Cantha stitch and batik and things like that. Really fine work. So it'll be great to learn from them as well.
I was very fortunate that I managed to catch you before you disappeared off for your 3-week expedition, let's put it that way. So brilliant. And you've also mentioned to me that you're working on a book at the moment as well. Is that a secret, or have I spoiled it?
It's my third book for Batsford, and I was commissioned shortly after the publication of Textile Nature.
Yes.
And it's an area that I've always been very influenced by, and I think comes through in my work. And it's really looking at the influence of folk art on embroidery. Yes. But it's also looking at the more sort of ordinary, everyday objects that influence people as well, because that ties in with how people's work reflects their surroundings and the objects that are around them. So it's really, again, like Textile Nature, it's a book about influences. It's not a how-to, although there are how-tos in it.
Yes.
It's really looking at a variety of really exciting artists and myself, and the work that we do that's influenced by this really popular trend, actually. But it's more than a trend. It's it's the traditions that we all have as well.
Yes, it quite often this folk art idea is touted as, this is the new trend, the latest trend. Well, actually, it's what it all started with, wasn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, and it's the history. It's a lot to do with history, and every country in the world has its own sort of tradition of textile and folk tradition, really. So it's a huge canvas to draw ideas in from, really.
Absolutely, and a huge subject to try and narrow down into a book as well, so there's a challenge.
Definitely.
So how did you first get interested in embroidery and textile art, Anne?
Well, I grew up in Canada.
Right.
I've lived in the UK for 30 plus years. I have family here, but my grandmother was Canadian, and she was an amazing needlewoman. She did everything, as many women in those days did.
Yes.
She did everything from lace making to rug hooking. And she didn't teach me, but I remember seeing a lot of her work.
Yes.
And when I was a bored teenager, my mother sent me on a quilting course, because I never sat still. I always wanted to make things. Yes. And I must have been the youngest participant on the course, but I absolutely loved it. And it got me using her old Singer sewing machine and making things. And I guess I always sewed. And I guess when I went to university to study fine art, I still used the sewing machine and I still made things. I think if I'd grown up in the UK, I would definitely have done a textile degree, but in Canada, it didn't really exist in the same way. We're very fortunate in the UK with our education system and the breadth of textile courses that there are. I think not everybody appreciates this, and I think that's why people come from all around the world to study here, because we do have this amazing tradition. So it was really interesting how I look back, even at one of my final pieces when I was at university, was done, part of it was done on a sewing machine. So it's always been there. And I suppose it's in the last 15 years that I've really been exhibiting and making properly in textiles. So it's gradually gone from mixed media, fine art, into textiles. That's my journey.
Yeah. Very good. I have to say, when I go and look around things like the Knitting and Stitching show and the educational institutions that are exhibiting their different textile-related degree courses, I kind of drool and think, I really wish I could. If I had my time again, would I have done a textile course? I did business studies. I'm a computer programmer. That was my trade at the start. You can't get much further away from that. And would I have done a textile course? I would have really liked to, but I think the kind of pressure was on to go to university and do something like business studies and go get a big proper job, etc. And that's the route I took.
Yeah.
So for me, this is very much my hobby, and it's something I love to spend my time doing. But oh crikey, some of those, particularly like the costume degrees and things. Oh wow, making costumes for theatre and telly, and that's just amazing. I love that. Anyway, so that was a really good basis then, as you say, to then move from fine art through the materials to then finish up with the textiles is an interesting path as well. And actually one that quite a few of my guests have followed as well,
Yes.
interestingly enough. So.
And I did further study at Goldsmiths College in London, which of course has a great tradition of textiles.
Yes, that's
that was great. And they've got an amazing textile collection there as well. So it's a real resource for students and people studying textiles.
So with having that kind of background, who or what have been your major inspirations, would you say, Anne? And currently as well, as our inspirations change, don't they, over time? They usually do.
I think there's a huge long list, and it would be hard for me to narrow it down to individual people. I suppose it's a range of people, from fine artists to textile artists.
Right.
I've always loved Joseph Cornell, and I've done sort of writing about him and how he's influenced my work, about looking at objects. People like Louise Bourgeois, who combines fine art and textiles, and then moving into people like Alice Kettle, who works on a huge scale.
Yes.
It really, that kind of monumental scale I find breathtaking. And even an African artist called El Anatsui, I'm not sure if that's the correct pronunciation, but he's shown at the Royal Academy, did a huge piece across the front of the Royal Academy a few years ago. And when I look at what they do, I think it's really inspirational, because it doesn't have to just be a small piece. You can work on any scale, you can work on anything. And I think that's where the fine art training comes through. You don't feel that you have to stay inside the box, literally. You can work outside. So that they've inspired me to use my work on other surfaces and explore applying it to other things. I'd say the two main themes for me are nature and folk art, and that's why I've written about them, because I feel that they're very close to my heart, but also they've always been there, like literally a thread running through my work. It's a terrible analogy, but just really, I think a lot of artwork is influenced by those things, but for me, they're the things that ground me. And I know there are other areas that I wouldn't be interested in. Those are the ones I keep coming back to.
Yes. And by the fact that you're coming back to them, that's where your heart lies, as it were, isn't it? You can try other things, and then it's like anything else we try. We can try different things, and then after a while you've found that you've drifted back to what you actually really like doing. So, and nature is an intrinsic part of folk art as well, because people have always reflected their environment and the things around them. And wherever we go, we can find inspiration in nature. This morning I was up early and there was fog over the fields, and then the sun popped out, and it was wonderful. It's just an ordinary environment can be made very lovely by the layer of fog and the sun. Marvellous.
Exactly. Absolutely.
So moving on to your favourite techniques, do you have any favourite techniques, and if so, why do you like them so much, Anne?
Right. Well, for me, collage is probably the biggest thing. And I think that was the link that got me from working in mixed media into textiles.
Yes, that makes sense,
So even when I'm drawing or I'm starting something, the blank white page I see as a threat. I love to cover it with different layers of paper or bits of fabric or even a wash of colour, just to break it down. And I think that's the way I approach textiles as well. It's always about mixing. And as you said at the beginning in the quote from Dina, it's not about being an eco warrior. It's about honouring old bits of fabric. So that's a wonderful way to use them, to reuse them and repurpose them, as the French would say.
Yes.
And I think also the way I put them together is my favourite way of working, which is to stitch, to use machine and hand stitching.
Yes.
And I use very old machines, well, not very old, but older sewing machines, because they're very solid and they take the punishment of several layers of fabric, which modern machines can't really cope with. So my work is quite heavy, quite dense. and I use a sort of edging finishing stitch to create a sort of netting over the surface, which somebody, when I was teaching in New Zealand, somebody said, that's an Anne Kelly stitch. And I thought, oh my goodness, no, it's not. It's just a device. But people do identify me with that stitch.
Yes.
Because they see it. And I suppose it's a personal choice. Some people like that. Some people prefer not to use it. I don't ever get my students to copy that, but I show them how to use techniques to make collages and to put things together, and to really reuse and respect older pieces of work. I think we have so much, and we all have a lot in our stashes at home, don't we?
Yes.
We don't use it all. And I think if we look through, sometimes you find things that you could put into a collage or you could use in a way that you might not have thought. So that's my philosophy, really, I suppose, about using it. And I always tell students to use the old pieces that they love, because otherwise they'll be lost and nobody will respect them and love them the way you do.
Yeah, and I think that's true as well, because we can hoard things for as much as we like, but at the end of the day, at some point, somebody else will be sorting that out, and it'll be, what the hell's all this rubbish? And it'll just get chucked away.
It'll go to landfill or to the charity shop.
Yeah, and it is an absolute shame, is that. Now, I have to say, I don't really have a hoard, but and that is because I, over the last 15 years, kind of I moved to Ireland and then moved to France. And when I actually came back from France 4 years ago, I knew that it was going to be 2 large vans. We're not talking vans, we're talking Sprinter, Mercedes vans for everything, because I couldn't make any more trips in a week than that was it. So sadly, things like piles of material and odds and ends like that, I did give them away because I just could not fit them in the van. I needed to have furniture and things for my life. So I'm now building up bits and pieces again. But I must be one of the only people who've been sewing for years who don't have a hoard of anything. It's a bit of a shame. So I keep thinking, right, I'm going to go around charity shops and there'll be bound to be. So I quite like, when I was a teenager, I used to get the kits that people have started, or they've done 3 stitches and then didn't know what to do, or they've half done something, or something that, an older lady's done that her relatives have thrown out. It's lovely to go and find those and restore those. Say when I was a teenager, I got loads of those kits. They're very expensive as well, so I could get them at the jumble sale. When jumble sales, I did for 20p. That'd keep me busy for ages. I still love doing those, and it's nice to see the bits of old textiles being used. So
exactly,
and I think what you've just said there to give me a really idea of that blank page is threatening, because quite often I sit there with a blank page and I'm focusing on the thing that I want to put on there, not necessarily the background. And I think my next few pieces, I'm definitely going to focus on the background first and see what I can build up out of it. Do it the other way. So brilliant. Well, I like that. You've inspired me on that point. What would you say has been the high point of your textile art and embroidery journey? And you've literally journeyed quite a lot. Where would you say your highlights are so far, Anne?
Well, I think really publishing books is wonderful. It's been great because you're able to share what you do with so many people that way, and people know your books sometimes better than you do. And I had a lady come to my open studio this year and say that she'd just lost her husband and she was really enjoying the book, and it was a real tonic. And I think that kind of comment just really makes you feel that you're on the right track. You're doing the right thing.
What a lovely thing for somebody to come and say to you as well. That's really nice.
Really lovely. I think exhibiting at the Knitting and Stitching show last year was a real step up for me, because it was such a big thing to coordinate, but it was great. It was a great experience. It was wonderful, and it made me realize how many people I knew. And I think that's a great thing that I love about teaching, is that you get to meet so many people. But also people people interact and they like contributing to things. So that's why I like doing group projects too. And also, I suppose the third strand is really making commissions for people. And I love doing commissions I did a big commission for our local hospital, Chapel, and it's been wonderful to get the feedback from that. But also, I think it's just great doing smaller pieces for private people because they really enjoy them, they really love them, and it sometimes makes them cry. And I don't want to make anybody cry, but it's great when you get that kind of real heartfelt response from people. And so for me, the work, the writing, the teaching, they're different strands of the same thing, really. But I can't really say what's been the high point. There have been lots of them. And I feel very fortunate that people respond and interact with what I do.
Yeah.
I think that's the reason for doing it. I think if I was just sitting in my studio doing work and nobody was seeing it, nobody was enjoying it, then you kind of wonder what's the point. But it's just wonderful when you get that kind of response. It makes it all worthwhile. So.
Fabulous. No, that would be a miserable existence, wouldn't it? Really?
Yes.
I think
so. Yeah.
I think it is lovely to be able to share what we are
Absolutely.
doing. I spend a lot of my time in my office, staring at my computer, working with people all over the world. But I still feel I have that element of sociability.
Absolutely.
Because I do, chatting and doing this podcast has been fantastic for me.
Yes.
It's letting me explore my love of art and textiles in a different way. I describe myself as a dabbler, and I am a dabbler, but it's something I really love to do. So I think the power of the internet to give us that extra layer of sociability is good, as well as going to classes and all the rest of it.
Transformed being an artist, the internet, because in the old days you used to have to take your portfolio around and show people or send people photographs. And now you can press a button and everybody can see what you do.
Yes.
And although it's wonderful, and I think it just means, like you say, you can keep in touch with people. And, even when I've been teaching in Australia and New Zealand and met some fantastic people, and they still keep in touch, which is wonderful. So it's great, really good.
And that is a very good reason why I know it takes extra time.
Yes.
And you think, that's another thing I have to do. I've got to put something on my blog, or I've got to post some pictures on Instagram or whatever. But it is a very, very important way these days of providing our work, whatever it is, so that people can find us and buy our books and come onto our courses and engage our services and all the rest of it. So, I'm ever thankful every day for the internet and sharing pictures and connecting. Although I have to say, I did actually connect with you, didn't I, when I was at the Knit and Stitching in Harrogate? Yes. So it's nice to be able to follow that up. So
it is. It's nice to meet people in real life.
It is. Yes. There is no substitute. As much as I like the internet, I really do like to go and have a right good old chat with somebody. And go to groups and things. So with all those highlights and all that excitement, what about, do you have any stories to share us when perhaps things don't go quite as planned and maybe it was a bit of a disaster? And what do you learn about those experiences, and what do you do with things that maybe don't go quite as planned?
Well, I think any artist, any creative person would be really not being truthful if they said that everything was always amazing and everything they did was always perfect.
Fab.
That's not the reality. And the thing is that the more you work, the more you expect of yourself. And I think I'm always saying to students, we put ourselves under too much pressure. I think we all expect everything that we produce to be amazing. And the first time you do anything, it's not going to be your best piece, is it? Because you're learning. And so I thrive on what I call happy accidents.
Oh, that's a lovely way of describing them. Happy accidents. I like that.
Things that weren't meant to go a certain way, but end up another way. And I think that's the key thing, is not to get too upset or just disheartened when things don't go your way. Just put it to one side. I suppose instead of focusing on disasters, what I tend to do is I work on several pieces at once.
Right.
So if something isn't going well, then I've got something else on the go, and I put it to one side. And I think that's a really important thing about living with your work and looking at your work and putting it, maybe just taking a break from it and saying, okay, this isn't going as well as I hoped. So I'm going to hang it up and have a look at it and then come back to it, because that gives you a bit more time and a bit more of perspective to know what to do next. So when I'm teaching residential courses, I always make the students do 2 projects, and they kind of look at me like, you know, what are you doing? That's crazy. We can't do that. But they do manage to always get almost 2 done, because we do a big one and a small one.
Right, yeah.
And it takes the pressure off the big piece to have something small on the go, because it's very intense when you're on a residential. It's all very, you know, your time is precious. But also people, as I said, do put themselves under more pressure than they need to, I think. And I find in the end, they're always grateful that they have something. They've done something else. It takes the stress out of the situation. So I suppose it's a mechanism, if you like, for being more creative. Is just finding ways to not just focus on one thing. Work in multiples, or work on more than one project at the same time.
And that's quite counterintuitive, because really the advice is normally focus on one thing, what's going to be your next step, focus on this, focus on that. And to then be faced with, right, you're going to have 2 things on the go now. It's like, oh, but I only have the weekend or the week or whatever. So, but at the end of the day, we don't need to stress ourselves. This is supposed to be something that we're doing for pleasure and enjoyment, and let's not be stressed about it.
No, exactly. And it also just gives you the space. I think that's really important, having the mental space as well as the physical space to create. You can't just always go in and turn on the creativity. It doesn't work like that. You know, as you said earlier, life gets in the way, and you know, you need to be in the right frame of mind, and it doesn't always coincide with when you're doing a course either. So you know, I like to respect that in my students and not put them under more pressure, because that's not what it's about, really. So I think if they've got time and they've got a bit more space, then great things happen. And yes, we do have happy accidents, but also wonderful things come out of it.
So that really leads on to this idea of the dreaded unfinished objects lurking around in backs of cupboards. I think if you have that attitude, therefore, that some of these things are happy accidents and are possibly a bit more forgiving with yourself, then hopefully there isn't that kind of pile of half-finished, unforgotten things lying around in cupboards either.
No, I don't really have that problem, because I generally work to exhibitions. So the work that I do, I know is going to be exhibited somewhere. So I don't really have that situation. I mean, a lot of textile artists will probably have a lot of work that they're not using at any one time. But I've repurposed things. If I've had something for several years and it hasn't been exhibited, I use it for something else, or I work over it too, which is another technique. You know, use it as a starting point for something else. So I do a lot of chopping and stitching. I treat my work. I'm not too precious with my pieces. I treat them as fair game. If they're not, you know, there's nothing more wonderful than somebody looking at a piece that you've just done and saying, I want that. You know, that is a wonderful feeling, because it means that you've connected with that person and they love what you're doing, and it's, you know, it's brilliant. But it doesn't always happen. There's always bits that other pieces that might not fall into that category. So I'm not super precious with things. I do put them away and take them out and say, right, that's going to end up in something else.
Well, it's another way of, as you say, reusing things, and I think it also declutters your head too.
Yes, absolutely.
Too much of things piled up.
Yes.
Is a reminder in some ways. Again, it can be taken as, this was a failure, this was a disaster, this was I don't like this, I don't like the colours. Well, okay then, so let's do something positive with it, and
absolutely,
let's move forward with it. And I think that's always a nice nice way to go, rather than be faced with a pile of plastic bags in the loft or something.
Yeah,
you know?
no, absolutely.
Fab.
Right.
So given that as you said, you've been working 2 exhibitions, you've got a lot of travelling and workshops booked in, and of course you've been working on your 3rd book, then how do you manage those projects? So they can be referred to sometimes as distant elephants. So it's something that seems such a long way away, but that gradually over time creep up on you. And if you aren't careful, whack, there they are in the room and you haven't done what it is you're doing. So how do you keep yourself organised and plan, but still be able to keep that creativity flowing as well, Anne?
Well, I would say I'm quite disciplined now. I haven't always been, but I'd say now that I plan my days quite carefully because I don't have unlimited time.
Yes.
So if I'm teaching, my day is very different from if I'm at home in the studio or writing. I heard a really interesting program on the radio about 2 weeks ago about time management. And actually, although all women, I would say, are great multitaskers, especially if you have a family, I think multitasking is overrated.
Yes.
You don't actually do anything really well if you're multitasking too much. And although you have to do it, it's really better use of your time to concentrate on one thing. So I do really value exercise and swimming. I always start the day, if I'm at home, I try and start it with some walking or swimming because it just clears your head and it makes the day much more, it flows better.
It really does. I tend to get up, especially in winter. I do it more in winter than summer. I'm up at 6 o'clock running along the seafront in the howling wind and rain in the dark thinking I'm a nutter, and I come back going, oh wow, yeah, I feel so much better.
You do feel better.
You do.
Because if you're doing something sedentary like sewing or writing, you need to get out and
get
the fresh air and the exercise. So and also see people as well. It's great. It's nice to get out and say hi to people. So I do that. And then if I'm writing, I do try to break up the day because it's really hard to sit and write. And I think only writers will appreciate this, but it's very similar to being a creative, artistic person. You can't just sit down and do it. You have to be, the stars have to align for you to write anything meaningful, because it takes time and you have to bury yourself in the work and the writing to really fish out the things that you feel are important, that you want to say. A lot of what I do is more editing than writing, because I'm looking at other people's words and trying to coordinate it and collate, I suppose.
Yes.
So it's like a collage, but in writing. The same kind of technique, really.
Yes.
So, but that takes time and that takes concentration and consideration. I think, again, to respect what people have written and honour what they've written and share it as well as you can. So that takes time. And then obviously being in the studio is just a joy. I love working. I love I love being surrounded by piles of threads. My dad always complains when I visit him that I leave threads behind.
Like dog hair, leave thread behind.
Just everywhere, but I love it, and so I have the radio on and I work, and I love to have long stretches where I can just work, because that's when things happen. That's when the magic happens. I think when you're able to have that time and that space.
Yeah. So one thing I like to do is time blocking. So I go through my week on my Outlook calendar, and then I will block out, right, Tuesday morning is podcast recording if I've got somebody to talk to, or Monday afternoon is I'm going to write my blog post for the week, or clients' work is Thursdays and Fridays and what, so I go through my week planning out blocks of time, because I think that then gives you the flexibility to be able to move things around if you need to, but also giving yourself close idea of, right, this is what I'm doing now, and then my computer dings at me and says, oh right, you're starting to go and work, do this client work or whatever, because I'm like juggling client work and juggling this and juggling my teenager and all that kind of stuff. So time blocking, I think, is a very good way to be efficient with your
Yes.
thoughts as well. As you say, multitasking, yes, we have to do it quite often, but when it
Yes.
comes to our work, I think we do need that focus of, I'm doing this and I'm doing this for 2 hours. But I kind of, like you, I like to move around as well. So I'll do something for like 15, 20 minutes and then I will get up and walk around the house, or I'll go to the bottom of the garden, come back and then move again. Because sitting down all the time is very bad for us as well, isn't it?
So, no. And also the thing most textile artists will sympathise with is the admin. There's so much time spent answering emails and sending pictures and doing all that kind of thing, which is really necessary and really important. And I think if you have a break, you do it better and more efficiently than if you're just sitting there constantly. It doesn't really it doesn't work the same way.
No, I think a block of time to say, right, I've got half an hour now, I'm going to get rid of those emails and messages, then it's done for the day or whatever, is another good way of tackling that. Brilliant. So we've been looking at some idea of your future plans. So what kind of plans and projects would you like to share with us today, and that you've got on the horizon creeping up on you?
Okay. Well, I'm planning, I suppose now everything's about 2 years in advance. So at the moment I'm booking for 2019, which is proving to be quite a busy year as well.
Wow.
It sounds crazy, but that's the way it works. So I've got 2 quite big exhibitions coming up in 2019, and I've got the new book will be out, so there'll be things to do with that and teaching and a little bit more traveling. So it's all looking very exciting. At the moment, the thing I'm focusing on is this travel tags project.
Yes.
And I'm really happy to send people a picture with a template on it and details if they want to get in touch with me. You've got my email address at the bottom of this, I think.
Absolutely, yes. So
I'm more than happy to do that. And it's the deadline is February, the end of February 2018. So if people want to do it with a group or with a guild or with their students, it's brilliant. So wonderful.
Okay, and is there details on your website or anything for that?
On my blog. There are details on the events page. There's a picture of the template and details of what to do.
Fantastic. Well, I'll make sure that we funnel people towards that as well, because that sounds a really great way to get involved as well. Wow, that's going to be, as you say, already a couple of very busy years there for you.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, Anne, do you know what? Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed chatting with you about your Stitchery story today. And it's been fascinating finding out in a bit more detail about you and your art and the approach you take to producing it and organising it as well. So I'm sure everybody's found that as interesting as I have. It's been brilliant. We've already mentioned about your travel tags. Yes. So I'm sure everybody would love to find out more about your work and follow your work. So I have included some of the images that you've sent me. That'll be on the page where this episode airs. But where else can we see your work? Keep in touch.
Yeah, I've got 2 websites. One is archive one and the other one's a mobile one. So you can look at it on a phone or a tablet. And then I've also got a blog that has current events on it. Brilliant. But I'm also very active on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of the above. Yeah. So people can if you just look for Anne Kelly Textiles or follow the links. Yes, I'll put all of those links that you've provided with us in the. And I've got my email address as well. So if anybody wants to get in touch, I'd love to hear from you. Well, that's absolutely fantastic, and I've really, really enjoyed speaking with you today, and I'm sure everybody else has too. Thank you, Susan. Cheers, Anne. Bye. Bye. If you liked this episode and want to hear more, then please join the Stitchery Stories fan club so you can get an email when a new episode is released. It's a quick and easy way of listening and of keeping up with any news and offers from our lovely guests. Please visit stitcherystories.com to join the fan club. Of course, if you have iTunes, then subscribe there to automatically get new episodes, and why not leave us a review and rating whilst you are there. So that is the end of our Stitchery story for today. So keep stitching, keep smiling, and keep creating your very own Stitchery stories.